She thought it was just another afternoon by the lake, a place where her family could laugh, rest, and feel free. But freedom has a different meaning when the color of your skin turns joy into suspicion. One moment, they were guests enjoying the water. The next, an HOA Karen stormed in, demanding they leave, convinced they didn't belong. What she didn't know was the truth that would stop her cold. This wasn't trespassing. This was home. And what happened next revealed more than just ignorance. It revealed America's deepest wound. But what happens when proof of belonging isn't enough and dignity itself is on trial? Marcus had always loved the lake. For him, it wasn't just water, it was a piece of history, a slice of peace his family could finally claim as their own. After years of saving, after generations of being pushed aside, he had purchased a small piece of land by the shore. On weekends, it became a gathering place. Cousins came with coolers, kids splashed in the shallows, and laughter rolled across the water. For Marcus, these moments weren't just about fun. They were about belonging. That Saturday afternoon was no different. The sun glistened on the surface, children raced along the dock, and for once, life felt simple. Marcus stood with quiet pride, watching his guests enjoy what had once felt impossible to achieve. But beneath the calm, there was an unease he couldn't quite name. He noticed a few glances from across the neighborhood, tight expressions that didn't match the day's brightness. To him, it was familiar, those silent reminders that some people still questioned his place, his right to stand where he stood. And then it happened. The sound of heels clicking against the wooden boards, sharp and deliberate. A woman in pressed clothes, lips thin with disapproval, marched toward the dock. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't stopping. And Marcus knew before she even opened her mouth that the peace of this day was about to shatter. Marcus didn't know it yet, but the next words out of her mouth would test more than his patience. They would test his very identity. The woman's voice cut through the laughter like a blade. "Excuse me, you can't be here." Her words carried not just authority, but ownership, as if the lake itself bent to her command. Marcus turned slowly, his guests falling silent behind him. She stood with hands on her hips, eyes darting from face to face, scanning his family like they were intruders. "This is private property," she snapped, her tone sharp, rehearsed, dripping with certainty. "The HOA doesn't allow outside guests." Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had heard this before, this assumption that his presence, his family's joy, their very existence in certain spaces was somehow an intrusion. But this time was different. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't borrowing someone else's belonging. This land was his, still, the sting of her words pierced. Around him, children shifted uncomfortably, their giggles replaced with questions they didn't dare ask aloud. His cousin clenched his jaw, ready to respond, but Marcus raised a hand. "Keeping the peace for now? I think you're mistaken," Marcus said evenly, trying to steady his voice. "We're not trespassing." But she didn't back down. Her voice grew louder, more venomous. "I know what I see. You people are always trying to bend the rules, always taking what doesn't belong to you." And with just 2 words, "You people," centuries of exclusion and pain came rushing back. The words hit harder than the heat of the sun above. "You people," a phrase loaded with centuries of exclusion, of doors slammed shut, of being told to leave spaces never meant for them. Marcus's guests exchanged uneasy glances. A neighbor across the street paused with folded arms, watching. Another pulled out a phone, recording, but not to defend, only to observe. The weight of being seen, judged, and cornered pressed down on Marcus. His mind raced. Should he argue? Should he prove himself? Should he remind her, in front of everyone, that this land was paid for, signed under his name, and protected by the law? Or should he stay silent, swallowing yet another insult just to keep the peace? The woman stepped closer, her shadow cutting across the dock. "Pack it up," she demanded. "Now, before I call security or the police." One phone call and joy could turn into danger. Would Marcus stand down or finally stand tall? The word police sent a chill across the group. They all knew what that can mean. A single phone call could twist the story, erase the truth, and put Marcus's family in danger. One false accusation, one biased report, and laughter at the lake could turn into headlines by nightfall. Marcus felt the eyes of his family on him, waiting, hoping, trusting him to stand firm. His pulse thundered in his ears. He knew he couldn't back down, not this time. Not here, on the land he had fought so hard to claim. He took a breath, ready to speak. And what he said next would silence everyone heard most of all. In one sentence, Marcus was about to flip the entire story upside down. Marcus squared his shoulders, his voice steady but filled with the weight of generations. "This land belongs to me." For a split second, silence hung in the air. Then came the scoff, sharp and mocking. "You own this?" The woman's laugh was brittle, but her eyes burned with disbelief. "Don't lie. People like you don't own lakeside property." But what she didn't know was that Marcus carried something that would leave her speechless. The words cut deep, not just because of the insult, but because of the history they carried. Every time his ancestors were told no, every time doors were slammed, every time ownership was stripped away, it all echoed in that single phrase. But before Marcus could respond, she pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." The air shifted. Children clutched their parents' hands. Guests lowered their voices. Everyone knew how quickly that single call could spiral. One false word, one biased assumption, and Marcus's joy could become danger in an instant. His pulse hammered. He imagined the flashing lights, the sirens, the accusations before questions. He saw the headlines, "Trespasser at lake property." He could almost hear the whispers. He must have done something wrong. But Marcus stood firm. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for the folded papers he always carried. The deed, his proof, his shield. He held it out, his hand trembling, but his eyes locked on hers. "Read it." For the first time, her voice faltered. She hesitated, her phone still in her hand. Around them, neighbors leaned closer, waiting, watching. Marcus's heart pounded. This was the moment, the line between humiliation and dignity, between being erased and being recognized. And when her eyes finally scanned the paper, her face drained of color. The woman's hand trembled as she lowered her phone. Her eyes darted across the deed, scanning every line as if searching for a loophole that wasn't there. Around her, the crowd had grown silent. Neighbors who once watched with suspicion now stood in quiet disbelief. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. In a single sheet of paper, Marcus rewrote the story she had tried to tell about him. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, holding the proof of his belonging, the generations of struggle bound into a single piece of paper. For his family, it was vindication. For his children, it was a lesson that their place in this world was not something to beg for. It was something earned, fought for, and protected. The woman turned, her face flushed, and walked away without another word. But her silence spoke volumes. It wasn't just about her embarrassment. It was about the truth she could no longer deny, that her prejudice had met a wall it could not climb. Yet even in victory, Marcus felt the sting, because the fight for dignity should never require proof. It should not take a deed, a paper, or a confrontation to prove what should already be respected, that his presence, his family's joy, his very existence was enough. And that is the reality many still face today. Too often, belonging comes with conditions. Too often, worth is questioned before it's acknowledged. Marcus's story is more than one family at a lake. It is a mirror reflecting a larger truth. Racism doesn't always come with slurs or violence. Sometimes it hides in the quiet assumption that certain people don't belong. The question is, how many more moments like this will it take before we finally learn that belonging is not a privilege to be granted, but a right to be honored?